I'm into 13. So,
Well, and you're in good shape,
well, we're
and you've been active.
tried to be. And
Sitting on the front porch doesn't do much.
no, well, it's just been great.
You're not allowed to listen to this for 60 years.
Yeah, he's got not much to worry about at this point. Well, so I think we're ready to begin. Excuse me, I did quite a bit. Shouldn't have done any talking this morning. Should have let the students do it. Okay, are you on the? Are you pulled back then now, Josh? Why don't you get your frame back so that you're just kind of looking over my shoulder in the wide shot?
Actually, I really cannot get your shoulder.
That's fine. Then push past that to frame the camera in for as we get started, and then pretty much from there on out, just stick with the head and shoulders. Okay? You tell me when you're rolling. This is a broadcasting history interview, which we're doing in the Iowa Broadcasting Archives on May, I believe it is the 12th, is it?
8th.
8th. It's May, lost track of the date here. And our guest for this interview is a pioneer broadcaster who began his broadcasting career when he was at the tender age of 15 back at WHBF radio in Rock Island, Illinois. He spent much of his life following that as a broadcast journalism executive and also as a practicing journalist in several places around the country before finally landing back in Rock Island as the manager of the television station that carried those call letters in the Quad Cities market in Rock Island, Illinois. And his name is Chuck Harrison, and I'm pleased to say that our paths have crossed a couple of times in our lives, and it's just a delight to have you here today, Chuck. And
I'm having all the fun.
And well, that's we're going to have some more fun now as we talk about your career. 15 years old, kid, got interested and was sort of started hanging out around the radio station.
That's right. And as I started, they didn't have internships back then.
No.
Unpaid. But Ted Arnold, who's from Jessup, Iowa, and was on the staff, and Forrest Cook, and Ralph Childs, who was from Iowa,
yeah,
but working at WHBF. They didn't throw me out. For some reason, they decided if I'd get the coffee and if I'd pull the transcriptions and put the old ones used back in the bin, that I could stay. And I started learning journalism 101 at that point.
Time frame, late 30s, second 1930s?
Yeah, about 1935.
Yeah, mid-30s.
Yes. Graduated from high school in 1937 and attended Augustana College until WHBF called and said there's a station up in Poinet, Wisconsin that needs someone in their staff, and we think you ought to try it. And they've recommended you. So I drove up there, got the job, and lived with the owner and his wife in their home, which was also the studio. The transmitter was right across a farm lane. She was a good cook. And for 2 years, I worked on learning my craft. And then I got a phone call from one of the fellows at WHBF. We've got an opening coming up and we think you're ready. So write a letter to the boss. I did. He called me and told me to come on down. I did. And I had an audition. The audition consisted of one of the first papers to come off the Moline Daily Dispatch press. They sponsored the news at 3:15. Somebody handed me a newspaper, and on the air, live, I had to ad lib a 15-minute newscast. And everything was written in newspaper style.
Exactly.
So
Reading it right out of the paper.
I had to redo it in what the human voice would say. And it worked out, and I got the job.
Terrific.
Yeah.
While you were there, and as a youth observer, and who, and you mentioned this name, Ralph Childs, and I'd like to just dwell on that a moment, because one of the serendipitous elements of this day that we're having here in Waverly is that you've had a reunion with a lady whose name is Sue Childs Hageman, and her husband, and that is the Ralph, and that her father was the Ralph Childs who mentored you at back in Rock Island, right?
You used the word mentored, and you're so right. Ralph Childs was a most unusual guy, a gentleman, highly educated, and for some reason, he decided that I might learn something from him. We never had a formal classroom relationship. I just watched this man, listened to his voice, the way he would portray something, the way he would handle himself, and it was very educational. One idiosyncrasy he had, he'd get a flair to recite poetry. So I'd have to go get an organ platter. They were big, heavy transcriptions.
Yes.
And the engineer would put this on. He'd listen to the music for a few seconds. Then out of his voice would come poetry from memory. No, there was no book in front of him, no reference guide. He simply searched his soul for something that fit the mood of that organ, and for 30 minutes or so, he would do poetry, and I sat with my mouth open, because I'm no poet.
And that was an interest of his, which I believe he carried forward with him to Shenandoah, Iowa, and radio station KMA.
He brought that with him to WHBF and then carried it on to KMA, where he had a great career.
As the news director.
I believe he was lauded late in life by the Iowa News Broadcasters Association as the News Broadcaster of the Year, and his wife, then living, accepted the award for him.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Right. And let's go back to the connection here, which is important to Iowa broadcasting history. Where he brought that from was WMT in Waterloo, which is where he had his first job in radio, right after he got out of, graduated from the University of Northern Iowa. So it was WMT to WHBF, and I'm not, do you know if he went directly to Shenandoah, or if there may have been a stop in between? I'm not sure about that.
At my age, I'll have to search my memory,
We
and I
don't
didn't
have to-
bring it with me.
We don't have to quibble over that.
I believe that he went to KMA directly from WHBF. Yes.
Okay. Now, so you're back, so you are now, they've called you in from the farm system. What was the name of the station in, or the town in Wisconsin?
Poinet, Wisconsin. The call letters then were WIBU. I have no idea what the call letters would be now.
A small, definitely small market radio.
Oh, farm market
Farm
radio.
market radio.
Yes.
You come back then as an announcer, and you are on duty on a Sunday. I believe the date was December 7, 1941.
Definitely, it was December 7th, yes.
And what happened that
As
day?
the newest and youngest employee, I had to work the Sunday shift, which was fine. I had 3 or 4 University of Iowa students who came up to see the station. So I gave them a little tour. We were carrying a sports event, so as long as I could hear and I didn't hear a call for a station break, I could wander a little bit with these young people. So was I. Took them into a little closet, which is where we kept the United Press news machine, And all of a sudden, the bells started going off like crazy, and I turned to the kids and said, the other kids, and said, oh, there's somebody sleeping down in a line, and they're supposed to break in on a regional service and provide regional stories, but they're sleeping at the switch. But it kept on going. And I turned my head around, and all I could read was FLASH, flash. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew it was something major because I had never seen that before. Then came the flash, Pearl Harbor bombed.
Yeah. And you put that on the air.
I ran as fast as I could. I broke an unwritten rule. You did not interrupt Jack Brickhouse on a play-by-play broadcast from Chicago, but I did. Gave the flash and went back in. There was, by then, more material coming in every second.
Sure.
The kids were excited, and I was a little stunned.
But you know, there are a handful of individuals in the country who were there in the station on the day that that happened, and you're one of them, which is part of your career.
Yes, a part I'll never forget.
No, I'm sure.
And the next day, though Sunday, I started looking for a place to enter the service. I tried the Navy Air Corps and found the Army Air Corps, and there was somebody in the office, and they grabbed me, and I was off and running.
And so you went into service right after Pearl Harbor then?
Not right after. If you're dealing with the military, there's a certain waiting period.
Sure.
But in, I think it was May, I went out to Santa Ana into primary, wound up at Williams Field, an advanced training school, graduated. They kept me as an instructor, and it was a P-38 advanced school, and I stayed there for almost 3 years.
So that was your assignment, was in training pilots flying
Yes.
P-38 aircraft?
I volunteered for B-17s, left for a few weeks, finished my transitional training. My orders were to go back to Williams Field. I thought that was kind of funny. We got near Williams Field, and the tower called and asked if Lieutenant Harrison was on board the craft. The pilot said yes. He said, well, tell Lieutenant Harrison that the operations officer in the tower is Colonel Worley. Colonel Worley wants to see him as soon as both feet hit the ground. And he walked up to the plane before the propellers stopped turning, said, welcome home, Chuck. You volunteered for B-17s, so we changed this place to B-17s. You got 30 minutes to get on the flight line. You know where Squadron 2 is. You have 5 students that'll be waiting for you.
So you had a new assignment in the same place?
Same place, new assignment.
Very interesting.
Which was a lot of fun.
Right.
I loved the B-17.
Well, I'm glad you could figure out how to do it. But that's a remarkable part of your career. So you're out of the Army in what, 45?
Late 45.
Late 45. And back to Rock Island.
Back to Rock Island,
And
back home.
to WHBF.
Oh, yes, yes.
And they had a job for you there.
A new job was to create a news
To
department,
create a news department.
and we did, with the help of some beautiful people. We had a staff of, I think, 6 people. We prepared every newscast, not necessarily read by someone in the news department. Staff announcers still did quite a bit of the reading of the news, but I set up a system of consultants, if you will. A number of them were already working for the Argus or the Dispatch in Western Illinois, and they would feed us stories. Back then, we even did things like obituaries on both sides of the river, Davenport and Bentdorf, Iowa, and Rock Island, Moline, Illinois. And obituaries were an important part of our news service.
And they still are.
That's disappeared.
Yeah, from radio, but
Completely.
a few radio stations did, but not very many of them did that, right? So you were one of the inventors of doing local news on radio. Your management had made that decision that they were, the correspondence of World War II really cut the opening in the ice for broadcast journalism, and the next level then was doing it at the local station.
I don't know what would have happened without World War II, but that created such an awareness of the possibilities that were present. All you had to do was unlock that Pandora's box and
Yeah.
it will all fly out. And yes, local news was the heartbeat.
Who was your manager there then, Chuck?
Les Johnson,
Les Johnson.
he had been with the newspaper, and the owners, the Potter family, bless them, decided that they needed somebody with a new and more professional look at this radio station. They had inherited WHBF from a local entrepreneur. They paid him a small stipend, and the $3,000 that he owed the banks and other providers of services, and they were not making a profit, but they could see down the road that it was going to be a worthwhile enterprise. So Les Johnson came over and did the job.
And he came over to manage that radio
Yes.
station then, which would do you have any idea how soon, how early they were, that station was on the air, the radio station?
I can only give you a guess, but it's a good one. The early 1920s.
They were in their 20s then.
They bought the station in about 1932,
Okay.
in the depths of the Depression.
So the person who licensed those call letters first in the 20s then sold it to these folks that you referred to.
That, I believe that's true.
Right. And Johnson, they hired Johnson as their manager then.
They transferred him. He was already
Oh, I see.
an
Okay.
employee of the Argus.
Okay. So you're in the period then when you're creating a local news department, just as the threshold of television is on the horizon. And your radio owners applied for a TV license.
They applied for a TV license probably 6 years after I came back from World War II. Somewhere around 1948 or 49, they applied
Right.
and got it.
They got in, then they were approved prior to something that we know as the freeze went into effect.
Yes,
So that when no licenses were issued by the FCC, except those that had already been granted.
you could not begin construction until you had a permit
Right.
from the FCC. But they had their eyes on a bank building, which they hurriedly remodeled into an office complex on the first floor, studios on the second floor for both radio and television. And we went on the air in about June of 1950.
Right. Which was after the freeze went into effect, but WHBF had been licensed prior to the freeze, as had WOC across the river in Iowa.
WOC went on the air, I think, about a year before we did,
49.
in 1949. To their credit, they were the first on the air.
Yeah.
They were the first to do news,
First in Iowa.
and first in Iowa, and have had a very successful run. They were very, and still are, very good competitors.
Right. But you were, so these two stations in in the Quad Cities were so unique in that WOC was one of two Iowa stations that got on before the freeze, and WHBF was the only one outside of Chicago, I believe.
Chicago stations did exist,
Yeah.
but I don't know of any others downstate. No.
According to their website, they were the only ones outside of Chicago. So I think that is so unique. Now you've invented, done some inventing on radio news. You're learning about how to write for radio. You're marshaling this information into newscasts, and now you have to do television.
Yes. The television chore was almost insurmountable. We were 180 miles from Chicago. Any film service of non-local news. The local news we could handle. But to get product from outside our community was almost impossible. I'll give you an example. I remember a Christmas season, not Christmas Day, but Christmas season. 2 weeks before Christmas, films started coming. The Express, I don't want to call it Air Express, I don't know which service it was, I've forgotten.
Yeah.
But they were moving Christmas packages. That television film for a news department could wait a week.
Oh,
A week.
not,
And then you'd get 4 boxes of old news. What are you going to do with it? We're supposed to be delivering today's news, and we don't have any film to show.
exactly. And you also, the station also did not have a network connection in the beginning, I assume.
Not in the way people think of a network service now.
Yeah.
The only thing that we had at the very beginning was what they called kinescopes.
Yes.
That was where a camera took a picture of a television tube, processed the film, and the product that came out, although hazy, although grainy, although full of horizontal and vertical lines, that was a kinescope. You could see a person's face, but only vaguely.
Right.
But that was what we had. So we did carry CBS, ABC, and Dumont programming on kinescope. It wasn't too long before we got a line that produced CBS programming for us. What an improvement. Black and white,
Yeah.
but what an improvement.
Of course. What do you remember about who did the the term anchor hadn't been invented? You're confronted with now radio news. You sit in front of a microphone. Now you're going to put one of those things, a camera, on somebody sitting in front of a microphone, and essentially that's kind of the way television news started. And maybe paste a picture on occasionally, and that was about it, wasn't it?
That was about it. I had a very brief newscast every night at 10:30, mostly still pictures, while we scurried to get equipment of one kind or another. Started out with, I'll call it a Polaroid type still camera,
Exactly.
and put the pictures on a board with a rim, and the camera simply panned from one picture to the next, going in a semicircle, sort of. Then we graduated to the old Bell and Howell camera,
16
using a
millimeter.
little black box, and we'd put the film in a dark room and shake it for a period of time, hope that a picture would come out. Still silent film only.
Yeah.
And the day we got our first sound camera was, we thought we were in hog heaven.
Right.
Until we found out that in order to cover any program of any length, we had to have a 1,200-foot magazine and mill the top off the sound camera and put this on top. Now our weight is almost 100 pounds.
They were
But it worked.
not quite as big as the one behind you, but it was a real monster to carry around.
We called it Monster or Beast,
Either one.
but it worked.
It worked. And so then you were a CBS affiliate. You eventually, as stations came on the air, you could only have one affiliation under the FCC rules.
In our case, CBS was basic, but we could carry Dumont
Okay.
television. It was a television version of the Mutual Network.
Right.
We carried that for a substantial period of time because there was no third station to
outlet.
absorb that
Right.
network.
Right. This then puts you into a relationship with, at the management level, was Johnson still managing
Oh, yes.
WHBF then? And a man named Bill Corton was managing Channel 2 in Cedar Rapids. and another CBS affiliate.
And they were very close personal friends.
They were.
Yes. Mutual respect
Sort of cut out of the same cloth.
and a good quality cloth
Good
it was.
quality cloth.
A personal note on Mr. Quarton. He was not a friend of mine. An acquaintance would be even stretching it. But I know one thing about Bill Quarton. He was mindful of the people who worked for him and worked with him. There was an employee at WMT named Benny Alter,
Benny Alter.
a fairly short fellow, a victim of polio, which didn't slow him down a bit. And Bill Quarton called Les Johnson at my station to say, we have gotten rid of the services of an orchestra that Benny worked with. There isn't any job for him here, but he's too good a man to let go. Do you have any room for him? Benny Alter came over and was hired. It was a fruitful merger. Mr. Quarton did a very gentlemanly thing.
And of course, Benny Alter was a legendary name on WMT.
He became one on WHBF, lived out his career at WHBF.
He did.
Yes.
So that's where he finished out his career.
Yes.
Then. I believe I'm right, and I think he was the first man on the street on WMT. I think he did the first man on the street show, and did a lot of those. Did the announcing on the.
He was multi-talented.
Yeah.
You could throw any sudden emergency at him, and whether it was band, orchestra, man on the street, whatever, he handled it quietly. It was his style, rather quiet, but he kept moving.
Very professional.
Very professional.
And we've come into possession of some very early tape where he was doing the announcing on one of these band shows. And his sign-off line, I don't know if he carried it over to WHBF, was "Radio-spectfully yours." Radio-spectfully yours.
No, that's new to me.
Well, I had not heard
You
it.
must have left it in the corridors of WMT.
Well, but he was, and so his experience with WMT went a way back, and I'm glad to have this connection in his experience, because I did not know that before, and glad to hear that it worked out for him too.
Yeah, it did.
Time passes, and the news department is growing at WHBF, I take it, and you're continuing to manage it. And you hit a crossroads there of some kind.
It hit me.
Okay, tell us about it.
It was a personal decision on my part, working with dear friends, many of who had been my teachers, but I could see no room for growth, personally. And there were several reasons for that, and I decided to move out and carve a career. Went to Philadelphia. And worked there for 5 or 6 years. And finally, it reached a point where, without employment, I still resigned. It was my decision. I wanted out and started looking for employment and got luckier than anybody has a right to be. Niles Trammell had been the head of NBC, had retired, and had joined the Miami Daily News, owned by the Cox family, and the Miami Herald, owned by the Knight family, and he in the middle with 20%, formed a corporation to build a television station in Miami.
In the Miami
And
market.
he allowed me to go down and build the news department for his new station. It was a ball.
Call letters?
WCKT. They've changed now.
Yeah. But now you're in Ralph Rennick land.
Mm-hmm.
The
And he deservedly, against 2 UHF stations, had done remarkably well. Now he had a VHF competitor. And I was there not a very long time. but after close to 2 years, decided that I was going to leave that market. And with Ralph Rennick's help, called and said, call Charles Cayley at Peoria, Illinois, at WMBD. He's going to put up a television station. So I did, and very shortly thereafter moved my wife out of Miami to Peoria in the dead of winter. We took over WMBD television, went on the air January 1st, 1959. That's the day that the Peoria Journal-Star went on strike.
I see.
I had 2 competitors that had been on the air for many years, but with a station manager and a program director and a great staff, and Charlie Cayley behind the scenes of the whole thing, intimately involved, we took first place in 1 year.
In the Peoria market?
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, you were doing, in Philadelphia, did you do anchor work then?
No, I
Okay.
was not union.
Okay, so you were working in the news department there.
That's right.
How about Miami then?
I was the whole ball of wax.
You were the news director there. You were you would organize that
I
news
had,
department.
had
in
to
that
build
market.
it and hire staff, day-to-day operations, and then do the news.
And I don't know what size that market was then, but it's
It was
certainly,
probably the 25th or 30th back then.
and it's a lot bigger than that.
It's
now.
grown tremendously.
But so you made a decision and to come back to, not quite completely to your roots, but back to downstate Illinois.
Yes.
And take over this small market operation. And went to number 1 in how long?
Took a year, but there's a catch to that. About a little less than 2 years after sign-on, Charlie Cayley was put in the position of selling the station. And Fred Miller at WEK, the NBC station, called me. He said, Chuck, this is the 3rd time I've called you. Will you work for me? And to make a long story very short, I went to work for Fred Miller. The most unusual period of my life. I love Peoria, and I still do. I have lifelong friends in Peoria that have nothing to do with broadcasting. The saddest part of my life now is watching dear friends in the business who've passed away.
Yeah.
There was a man at WEK that I joined. He was already there. Tom Connor. That was his broadcast name. His real name was Emil Sepich. And the name Emil Sepich is worn with pride in Canton, Illinois. If I'd been Emil Sepich, I'd have kept that name, a name of quality, and so was Tom Connor. And our weatherman, Bill Houlihan, our Hank guy, Hank Fisher, they're all gone now.
Yeah.
But the memories I have of them at that time are the high points of my personal career. Beautiful people.
And where are we in terms of the time frame now? We're into
I went to WEK in 1960.
in 60, right at the beginning of the decade of the 60s then.
Yes.
And so you were there during that tumultuous decade when television really came into its own as the ultimate medium.
Less so in Peoria than in your major cities, than in your West Coast cities. But there was an effect. There's no question there was a decade of the 60s, as you point out. Yes.
And of course, we had some of that was network experience, the 4 days of grieving for JFK, and then the burning of the cities and the assassinations.
We had it. We had it all.
And there were ramifications of that in the local communities that certainly challenged.
Yes, some. Peoria, for example, had a Bradley University, and there was some effect on that campus from the 60s. Yes.
Not as much perhaps And,
Not as much, but it was there.
yeah.
Yeah. Your point's well taken.
What kind of a news operation did you have there in Peoria? This is what, again, this is what, maybe a 80s market?
90s.
90s, okay.
Uh-huh. But a good competitive
Three-station market.
three-station market. Then it became a fourth station while I was there. And then a nearby community put up an independent station, so there were 5 signals locally. I don't know that they were all on the cable,
Yeah.
which wasn't a tremendous force at that time,
Right.
back in the 60s, but became one.
Certainly did.
Yeah.
So your role was always as a news manager. Did you get on the air at all?
Completely, every day.
Oh, you did, that,
Yes.
okay.
You're leading me up to a point where I made a decision.
All right.
In 25 years in television, close to 25 years in television, I had had 2 Christmas days off.
I
Think
can
about
believe that.
I had had no Thanksgiving Day off. And the list goes on. And I began to look at my wife sitting home alone all those years while I sat at a typewriter in a studio. Not many people in the office. They were all home eating turkey or having Christmas gift exchange. And at that point, I decided no more air work. The price I'm paying is too high for my personal needs. I'd rather be a manager of a news department and let some younger person do the news.
Okay.
That's when I moved to Louisville, Kentucky, to a great station, WAVE,
Okay.
and started to settle down. I had been with them for 5 months, and I called my wife to say, dear, 4th of July weekend is coming up. We'll have 3 days off. Where do you want to go and what do you want to do? And all I heard was crying.
So you were so when you went to WAVE, what was your role then as news director?
As the title was co-news director.
Okay.
The news director was to become editorial director, which he already held that post. And with some roots in the background of my family in Louisville, and I love the community and the station, I was set to stay there the rest of my career and not do air work except on occasion if needed.
Right. So you were in Louisville, and that was the station that was associated with the Morton family, the Senator Thurston Morton.
There was the Morton family, the Norton family, the Thurston family, and another family I can't think of. But in the South, family names are carried on in the next generation. So if you look carefully, Ballard was the other family.
Ballard, okay.
You could find a Ballard Morton, a Morton Norton, a Thurston Norton, and I had a neighbor across the street that I was suspicious of because his name was Harrison Houston. My grandmother's name was Houston, and from that area. So the interchange of family names is very common in the, not the deep South, but in the mid-South.
But they were a very, very prominent family, and
Oh, yes.
and that was the ownership that was there at that
Yes.
time. Right. Pretty good sized market.
A good-sized market with excellent competition.
Oh, yes.
WHAS,
Yes.
radio and television, head-to-head competition.
And the good newspaper there too. They
Yes,
owned the WHAS, I believe.
they did. Louisville Courier-Journal.
Courier-Journal.
Yep.
Comes now a call from the number 3 market, hog butcherer of the world, right?
WGN called, and as I walked out of the gate area to the plane, I said, "Dear, you'd better start getting ready to pack." We moved to Chicago. It was a pure delight. I had only been there 2 years, and we beat NBC at 10 o'clock. And the next year, we beat CBS at 10 o'clock. We could never beat ABC.
Never managed that.
Their news operation was a hummer-dinger,
Yeah.
and they deserved to be first place. And we didn't deserve to be, we should have been fourth place. But we got along real well.
You were the WGN owned by the Tribune
Oh, yes.
company. Was the independent station in the Chicago market, a non-network station.
Capital I, independent. Yes.
Yes, right.
Not an easy job.
And a non-net, at least in the traditional sense, not a network affiliated station.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
in no way.
yeah.
That has changed in the news area where WGN has an affiliation of some kind with CNN. Their news sources are available to WGN. So for news quantity, news quality, they're on a peer situation with any owned and operated network
Right.
station. They truly are.
But service, that sort of news service was not available at the time that you
Not
were
at
there.
that time,
Yeah.
no. CNN
CNN
hadn't been invented.
Exactly. So our time frame now has moved up to when you went to
Oh, 1970?
70. Okay, 1970, and you're managing the independent, non-affiliated station news department, and also that long-standing, powerful radio news department on WGN.
With or without Wally Phillips. And Wally was a unique personality. I will never forget one day when the then manager of the radio station came to me and said, "Chuck, I'd like to use your news person in a conversation with Wally." I said, "Explain what you mean by this." "Well, let Wally ask him some questions outside the news." Oh, I said, "You just want them to work together." I said, "Of course." And we did it. And the newsman that we used in the morning with Wally, who was not exactly the easiest person to work with, got along with Wally perfectly, and they charted some new ground, if you will. They broke down the now here's news, now here's Wally concept, and it became more of a flow.
So that news became integrated, and Phillips, of course, was the dominant morning personality in Chicago.
And deservedly so.
Yeah.
Deservedly so. Now, Wally was two different personalities.
Okay.
On the air, everybody knows what Wally is. When he got off the air, Wally Phillips was very quiet, very reserved, not communicative. If he went into the snack bar to get breakfast, a late breakfast, he had breakfast at 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd go sit in a corner with a newspaper up in front, and I guess wind down.
Yeah.
He was a very intense person. I say this with deep respect. I don't mean anything I've said to be a challenge to the man as a person.
Right.
He was just kind of divided. On the air, one kind, off the air, another. Broadcaster with a capital B.
Had to be.
Had to be.
Right.
But he had to prove it 6 days a week
Yeah.
for years.
And you had to have some pretty good, pretty strong news talent in order to sit at the same table with him.
Yes, yes. But I'm proud to say most of our news on radio or television was aired by news personnel. Most of them were very professional. I liked, as people, I liked all the people that I work with. I hope they felt the same way. It was fun.
Well, let's take a little different direction here now. Chuck Harrison has arrived at the number 3 market in the country, and has been very competitive with the newscasts he's putting on the air. You've also, from very early on, been associated with an organization now known as RTNDA, Radio Television News Directors Association, originally known as the National Association of Radio News Directors. And I believe in a dinner conversation last evening, you told me that you were at one of maybe the second organizing convention of that organization.
I believe that's true. About 1946.
That would have been.
Mm-hmm. A very small, dedicated group of professionals, open only to those who ran the news department.
News directors.
A man holding some managerial responsibilities, but with a lesser title, did not belong.
Mm-hmm.
It was club. There were maybe 100 of us, not more than that.
Yeah. And a couple of pretty familiar names in that assembly.
Well, just from the state of Iowa, you've got Jim Borman, Cheverton, who held presidential spots. I'm trying to think, Sig Mickelson, did he ever work in Iowa?
No, I don't believe so.
Minnesota.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Twin Cities.
And then there was a Grant Price who belonged
no, I
to.
wasn't at that one, Jack.
No, you weren't the first one,
Yeah.
but you were there.
Yeah. But at that organizing convention, Shelley was there.
Jack Shelley, that's the name that escaped me.
Right.
Oh gosh, he was there.
Yeah.
And a fine president.
Yes. One of the
Yes.
first, I think maybe the second president, maybe the third.
Second or third, yeah. Right after Hogan, he was the first.
Yeah.
Then I think it was Mickelson and then Shelley.
I can't
Okay.
recall the sequence.
Whatever, he earned it.
And comes now the 70s, and Chuck Harrison, who has been active then in, NARND evolved into Radio and Television News Directors Association, and you were active pretty much throughout the history of the organization on the board and
On the
various
board, yeah.
responsibilities.
And then came the big deal in Boston. A hard-fought campaign, but I was named president-elect, frankly only because of WGN's call letters and their reputation, not mine.
Well,
And Bruce Dennis, who had been news director and was still at WGN, was very helpful, very
and
cooperative.
he was a past president.
He had been a president.
Right.
And I want to nod in obeisance to him, a fine gentleman and a good friend. The only mistake he ever made was hiring me, but
And
he was human.
So you were elected, and you're the president-elect, and that carried with it the responsibility of organizing the next year's convention at that time?
Yes, it worked out pretty well. I set up a charter flight to Nassau, which was the place it was to be held, and we had a good attendance. We had some luggage lost, and that was a downer as far as I was concerned. But my job started then, and I flew out of Chicago almost every Friday to go somewhere to a news group, and I'd get home Sunday night and show up at work Monday morning.
Mm-hmm.
We managed to grow to 1,000 members of RTNDA that year, which was a high point.
The year that
Now,
yeah.
now they have exceeded that by a wide margin.
Right.
They've done a couple of things. They've opened the doors to more professionals who may not have the title news director, but who perform many of the functions of a news executive.
Right.
They've opened it to students in colleges who are studying journalism, who are obviously have an intense interest in the profession. The doors are open more now.
As you were in my office just before we came over here, you picked up a copy of, I believe it's Broadcasting Cable, a magazine, and you noticed that a giant associate of the RTNDA has passed on.
Barney Oldfield.
Colonel.
No relation to the race car driver,
No.
but a colonel in the Air Force who adopted RTNDA when it was NARND
Yes.
at an early convention and just kept doing things for us on his own. No,
He was
he
a
had no title.
public relations specialist.
PR type things, but an excellent job.
Yeah.
Created the foundation. I can't say enough good things about Barney.
And
And
nurtured that scholarship program. He loved presenting those scholarships, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He was so
Yes.
good at it.
Many's a convention he would show up for the foundation activities and disappear and go back home to California. Well, his wife was not well, and I can see why he'd head on home in something of a hurry.
Yeah.
But what he did has never been noted in its entirety for the good of the organization.
Exactly.
He was a fine gentleman, too. He wrote a book, Never a Shot in Anger, which I read with appreciation. I've got fond memories. God bless him.
So you're, and at the time you held the office, it was called president. Since then, it's been changed to chairman, and there is the executive title is president. But you were the elected head of the organization.
Back then, we had no paid staff in Washington. I worked hard to get it started and was successful. We didn't have the president that we have now, and Barbara has done things in an exemplary fashion.
Right.
She really has. The chairmanship role for the now chairman has eliminated constant travel, which means a little more time to keep an eye on the shop back
Right.
home, less money drain from the company that is supporting him, and a little more time for an overview of what we should be doing next.
Yes.
With the help of Barbara and her staff. We now have a large staff in Washington.
It is the professional association that represents broadcast journalism in the world, really.
Oh, yes. The only sad thing that I really would note in my career, my year as president, is I worked hard to try to get more minority membership, active membership, in our TNDA. And I could not. I failed.
Well, I think they're
We
still
now
fighting
have a
that
group
battle.
for black journalists, we have a group for female journalists, we have a group for Mexican journalists, and I wish they were all under the umbrella. I think it would be more meaningful for them to be in a larger, more active, more powerful organization, but it doesn't suit their needs right now.
Yeah.
So bless them.
You bet.
Yeah.
Well, let's just stay with that year, or maybe possibly the year before. But let me take you now to Dallas in the mid-'70s, and what turned out to be a pretty unique event, a news conference with the president, Richard M. Nixon at the time, held at the NAB, National Association of Broadcasters Convention in Dallas, on the stage of their auditorium, and Chuck Harrison is presiding over that process. Remember that day?
I'll never forget it. Actually, I was presiding over a part of the stage which was filled with working news people,
Right.
men and women. Yes, I remember that day.
And you had the unenviable task of selecting who was going to be called on, and there was a guy named Price sitting out there among those obscure news directors who had been, for the first time, called in to participate in a presidential news conference, along with the network stars. They were there too.
Oh, yes, many of them.
And there was a rather celebrated exchange between a fairly prominent network broadcast journalist and the President of the United States on that occasion.
There was. And at the end of that interchange, I definitely remember going this way to Grant Price.
And Grant Price got to ask a question that stirred a few breezes back in Iowa when Richard Nixon responded to his question, which was about farm policy, with the phrase, "The farmers have never had it so good," which resonated in a front page headline on the Des Moines Register the next morning. So that was sort of my moment in the sun.
Toughest part of your question was you had to follow Dan Rather with his interchange with then President Nixon.
I didn't think you'd ever call on me, Chuck. I was drilling my eyeball into yours, but I couldn't believe it when you did. But that's really, that was just a remarkable exchange at the time.
One that neither one of us will ever forget.
Right, or exactly.
Yeah.
You remember that? So this is the point in Nixon's presidency when he's under a lot of pressure, particularly on Vietnam, and Rather is still being fully Dan Rather, and so he I don't remember what the question that he asked Mr. Nixon. You remember the president's reply?
Are you running for political office? Or are you running for something? Wasn't that it?
And Rather said, "No, Mr. President, are you?"
And that set off the flames.
It was a unique moment in broadcast experience, certainly. No, that made a lot of headlines in a lot of places, a lot more than mine did. But
Well, back home, I think you got really decent play.
oh,
You had a good question.
It was a legitimate question, and of course the president tried to. The question went to the point of the administration was encouraging at that point, in order to boost exports, it was called fence row to fence row production. They were encouraging farmers to plow up groves and waterways and plant corn and produce huge amounts of corn for export. In the meantime, the cattle industry in Iowa had gone into the tank, and obviously he had forgotten about that when he said the farmers have never had it so good. So it did eddy around a bit, all right.
Too quick an answer.
Yes, of course, it was a flip answer, and sometimes that pains politicians for sometimes afterward. Well, there's a this was during your tenure at WGN, and that came to a point where you took your career in another direction that was pretty unique. Most managers came out of sales, was almost a given. Occasionally somebody from programming, but managers came from the sales department.
That's true, but you're going back quite a ways.
Going back a ways, but you certainly were among the earliest to take that step out of the news department.
I had noticed some news directors moving into a managerial position, and that percentage has grown.
Yeah.
Partly because the news department is an economic benefit to any radio or television station. If it's well run, if they work hard. It was I did not mind making the change. I enjoyed it. I worked for a company when you told them when you wanted to retire. You didn't have to retire at 65, but this family-owned station, the Potter family, had this policy, and I didn't retire until I was 67. I'm now 82 years old. In July, I'll be 83. So I've had a long tenure to get used to retirement, and I'm enjoying it.
Well, let me take you there step by step. You went from Chicago first to a pretty small market, Rockford, in northwestern Illinois. That was your first manager's job,
Yes.
wasn't it? And what were you remember the caller at the station you worked for there?
WIFR.
Okay.
It had been WCEE. It was bought by an outfit in Virginia. Went out there and enjoyed it for a year and a half. Some things I was promised didn't deliver, and I left that company. Was operated on for lung cancer, and as I recuperated, here comes WHBF after all those years.
You're back home
Would you consider coming back home to run our television station?
as the manager.
And it happened.
Yeah.
Took 15 minutes to settle it.
Okay. So now you're back at WHBF in early, late
1978,
late
78,
70s.
79.
Yeah.
I started actually 79 January.
And now you have the responsibility for the entire station and
Oh, yes.
the overview of. How did that feel? Did you obviously you settled into it and were
I kept looking over my shoulder to see where Les Johnson was, and the sales manager, long gone, and the program director. No,
the buck stops here?
the buck stops here, and I loved it. I really did. Good people.
You still, the ownership that you worked for, was that by any chance still the original ownership, or it changed hands?
The Potter family had owned the radio station since about 1933.
Okay, that goes back to that
There was
ownership.
a man named Beardsley who owned the WHBF prior to that, but he was bankrupt. And at that time, the FCC wanted newspapers to take over radio stations to help build the industry.
Right.
So they did. And then later, the FCC said, you got to sell FM or AM, and you got all sorts of trouble if you have any affiliation with a newspaper.
Yeah, cross ownership rule.
Which wasn't important. Believe me, if a newspaper owned a radio and or television station, the staff of the newspaper weren't going to help that radio or TV station any more than they had to.
That wall was still there.
Just common pride.
Yeah,
And I
right.
don't blame them.
Yeah. But that ownership was still there when you came back to manage
yes.
for them then.
Yes.
And then you retired from your managed responsibilities in 1987.
That was my decision. My wife had recovered from major surgery, and we had a future to look forward to, and I thought it wise to take advantage of all the time that we had.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Your dear wife Eloise of 56 years, and she went over a lot of the American terrain with you.
I dragged her over all kinds of terrain. Big cities, little cities, north, south, and if you can imagine taking your wife from Miami, Florida to Peoria, Illinois in the dead of winter, that shows you've got a lot of gall.
She must have had real affection
But
for
she,
you, Mr.
she
Harrison.
smiled and came along.
Well, as you reflect back on all of those years and what's your sense of the role that television played in the 20th century, particularly in the field that you were sort of at the core of, being the news element of it?
I think television has played a major role, truly. Less so in World War II, because television had not grown in stature yet.
Right.
I hope Edward R. Murrow doesn't shoot me for that comment. But certainly after that point, we mushroomed as a source of information and entertainment and all the rest of it. We're going through an explosion right now of the delivery system.
Yeah.
Cable and satellite provision of signal may well wind up the method of distribution, less so than the television transmitter station. The reason I say that is that networks, the original networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, are no longer paying the stations locally for carrying their programs. They're making deals of one kind or another, but what it boils down to is the money is not coming in. That cuts the money available to the stations to provide a local news service. Then you have the cable systems who are keeping a fuse lit on a big bomb, which means direct satellite to the home delivery.
Yeah. And the whole concept of the digital distribution system, which is going to...
I've got a question mark on digital. It's a personal one, based on ignorance, admittedly ignorance, but first they got to sell it, and they're not doing a job of selling digital transmission. Why? It costs $1 million to take a local television station and transfer it to digital. They're not going to throw $1 million down a sewer. They've got to see the money coming in. They don't see it yet, so it's going to be a lot slower.
Well, it's going to be slower, but it's going to be. The FCC is, you know, they're going to do it, and it is going to happen, I think. But it has been very slow, and
the FCC has said many things at many times.
Yeah.
Sometimes they were political messages,
Oh yes, right.
not based on fact. I'll hold my breath.
And I will hold it with you. It certainly isn't going to happen. It isn't going to happen by 2006. But I guess my view of it is, it's inevitable. I mean, digital is the technology of the future, and the broadcasters will have to be a part of it at some point in time. So we'll see what happens.
A friend of mine in 1946 built an FM station in Michigan because it was the wave of the future. He went bankrupt in 10 years.
Yeah.
Now, FM is just now. FM, 60 years later, is achieving its true potential.
Yeah, but it got there.
Sometimes it takes a long time.
Yeah, right. Well, it has been a joy to have you here, Chuck, and to review your remarkable career. Some of the, you really, you know, those people that you served with at RTNDA, some of the great names there that you recall. You mentioned the Iowans, of course, were Shelley, Van Dyke, Borman, Cheverton, and Bill Roberts, who came.
Oh, Bill Roberts, that's right.
Time Life.
And a fellow named Grant Price.
Never got to the presidency.
No,
but
you were active.
oh yes, yes, very much.
Certainly in the state of Iowa you
Yeah,
were.
very much
And
so.
are.
And right now, primarily interested in taking care of this history that you and I have been talking about here, which I think is a terribly important legacy, especially Iowa's role in it, and those names that we've just recited.
And deservedly so. Deservedly so.
Yeah.
Iowa has always had a top spot in quality and in performance of news.
Right.
Yes. Just like your college here.
Yeah.
You're a small, independent school, and you've got more bulldozers than the law allows. You've got a more ambitious plan. You're going to start losing parking lots pretty soon.
We'll have to hang it somewhere. I don't
You're going to have to hang them this way.
The students are already parking over in Butler County, I think, but
Well, it's a sign of a wide-awake administration,
it is.
dedicated staff, and a real good student body. You put those three together and you got a winner.
Well, and then you put all of that under the umbrella of a very fine president and a chairman of the board of trustees, whose name also is Hageman, Fred.
Oh,
And that brings us back to your connection to Mrs. Hageman, and so this really has been a very fascinating convergence today.
Sue's father was Ralph Childs, who got me started in radio in 1935, 36. God bless him in his memory.
I think that's where we should stop, Chuck.
Hey,
Thank you.
good to be with you.
Very good to meet you. Good to have you here. Well said. Ready to try it?
Go ahead.
Happy birthday, CBS 2 at 50. Happy birthday, CBS 2 at 50. Happy anniversary, CBS 2 at 50. Happy anniversary, CBS 2 at 50. That's struck. Happy anniversary, CBS 2 at 50. Okay, let's try a couple, framing it so that the whole logo is in there.
Let's do there.
Happy anniversary, CBS 2 at 50. 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 That's probably as good as